So today I want to talk about this idea of being how to make better decisions, because being fit for the future is all about how fit you are in making decisions and how well you can make decisions even in an uncertain future where we don't exactly know what the impact of our decisions is going to be. So I want to share some ideas with you here today about decision making, and especially decision making in an uncertain future. And we're all facing, in whatever business or industry we're in, there's some interesting decisions coming out. So there are some tough decisions ahead. And I often tell the story of Albert Einstein when he was teaching at Princeton University. He was criticized one year by the other faculty staff because he gave his students the same exam 2 years in a row. And he said the questions are the same, but the answers are different. And I'm no Einstein, but I reckon the same thing applies today. Some of these questions that we're asking about success in our business, in our organization, in our life, are the same sort of questions we've always asked, but some of the answers might be different. So let's have a look at how some of those questions and answers and how you prepare and how you make better decisions in this uncertain future. So as I said, I like my programs to be interactive. So it's not just me sitting here and giving you a presentation with some slides. There'll be a lot of that, but there'll also be the chance for you to interact. So here's the first interactive bit. I'd like you to think about, and I'm going to ask you to share in a minute, but don't do it just yet. I'd like you to think about, what is the best decision you made in the last 12 months and why? And I also like you to think about, what is the worst decision you made in the last 12 months and why? So I'm just going to give you a little bit of thinking time around that, and then I'm going to ask you to share it, and I'm going to ask you to share it in a specific way. So don't try sharing it just yet. I'm going to just give you time to think about what is the best or the worst decision you made in the last 12 months and why. And when I say why, I'm thinking of, why do you think it was the best decision you made? Or why do you think it was the worst decision you made? Now, you don't have to go for the absolute best, the absolute worst. You don't have to go back through the last 12 months and figure out which was the absolute best decision or the absolute worst decision. You might go for, what is a really good decision I made, or what was a really bad decision I made. I don't mind whether it's the best or the worst. And the way I'd like you to share it, because I want to keep this anonymous, because you may not want to share, especially your bad decisions, to do it through ASCII.com, which is a web page. So let's go to that now. I'll show you this so if you go to ASCII.com, you will get it's like a public bulletin board. So let me do that for you now. So let me just show you what that looks like. So if you go to ASCII.com, you'll get a page like this. And it'll say, what is your best or worst decision in the last 12 months? You can click here and type in. Now, I don't want you to type in your name. It's okay not to. You just type in for here, best or worst. And what I'd like you to write down is just some sort of quick summary of the best decision. Like, I might say, hired Sarah as my EA, which was a really great decision I made. But also, why do you think that was a good decision? So why? And then you put in whatever you want. Okay, so what is the reason for that? Now, you may not want to name people or be very specific about it. That's okay. But I'm just interested to see best or worst decisions. It doesn't matter either one that you want to share, and why. So what is your best or worst decision in the last 12 months and why? Okay, so let me refresh this. Okay, so here's one about retiring but continue writing and doing some paid work. Okay, so good. So I also wanted the addition to that is, why was that a really great decision? I'd like to know that. Okay, let me get rid of my dummy one. We only need about 2 or 3 here. Okay, so here's good. It's good. It's a couple of answers coming through. So strategic thinking beyond 2 to 3 years, stretching out to 15 years. Fantastic. So why was that a good decision? Here's one worst decision: not moving my business model soon enough and letting inertia creep in. So why was that a bad decision? Okay, good. I'm glad people are sharing here. Thank you for that. I think we've just get this one more. We'll have 5, and then we can continue. Okay, so we've got a few here now, right? So, um, okay, good. So now I'm not going to judge whether these are good or bad decisions or whether they're the right or wrong thing to do. That's up to you, of course. Um, But let me look at, if you look at those 5 decisions there, so let's have a look at them. So the 3 best and 2 worst decisions. So, and again, because this is very, very simplistic and I didn't go into a lot of detail here, so my assessment of this that I share with you might not be exactly right for your individual circumstances, but I reckon that you'll get the principle that I'm talking about here. So if you have a look at these, so taking care of my health on a regular basis, it was a good decision to put myself first. So good. So in this case, the person who said that didn't necessarily talk about I lost 10 kilos or my doctor told me that I otherwise would have had a heart attack. Look at this next one here. Retired but continue writing because now there's a great feeling of freedom, the best of both worlds. Good. Okay, so that's the outcome. So you're looking at this decision as being a really great decision because now you've got that great feeling of freedom. Fantastic. Let's look at this one here. So strategic thinking stretching out to 15 years forced us to think about the long-term sustainability. So this one, I'm not quite sure whether that was part of the impetus behind the decision or now looking back, we're now looking at long-term sustainability and that's why we think it was a good decision. Let's look at this one. Not moving my business model soon enough and let inertia creep in. And then you got the not ideal client was attracted to it. So as a result of that decision, something bad happened. Same with this one, not going on more holidays with my wife. We would have been happy and more relaxed if we did. Again, as a result of that decision, we had, possibly a negative outcome. So there are 2 kinds of ways of judging our decisions. And you can see a couple of these decisions here. They were judged as good or bad based on the outcome. In other words, with hindsight, we can say, this is a bad decision. I wish I'd gone on more holidays. This is a bad decision. I wish I'd changed my business model. There are a couple of others, like this one here, where it was a good decision to put myself first. So that was the decision was judged as a good decision based on what you decide to do at the time you made it, not necessarily based on the outcome. And this is a big difference between the way that people judge their decisions. Many people judge their decisions based on hindsight. In other words, after the fact, as a result, now that we know what the outcome was, you can say that was a good decision or that wasn't a good decision. But the better way to make decisions and to judge your decisions is to act with foresight. In other words, at the point you made the decision, that's how you judge whether it's a good or a bad decision, regardless of the outcome, because you can do everything you can to make a good decision, like this one here. You decide to take care of your health on a regular basis every day with meditation and going to the gym, and you might still have some sort of unexpected bad health outcome. But the decision that you made at the time was still a good decision. And you see the difference? And it's really important that when we make decisions, we don't only judge them in hindsight, because hindsight is too late. So the best thing that you can do is be able to act with foresight, not just with hindsight. And that's really what I want to talk about today and help you make better decisions with foresight. So the 3 steps to this. So one is scanning wider, so actually having more options available to you, and then narrowing down the options so that you can make a wise decision, insightful decision. And then how do you go a little bit deeper to actually make put them into action? Okay, and today we're going to talk a little bit about this area here, the narrowing down. So I'm not going to talk about all this stuff that's coming up in the future. I'm going to touch on that a little bit, but also once you know what some of the options are, how do you narrow it down so that you can decide what your strategy is going to be going forward? We won't spend a lot of time on execution either, because we've got limited time. So let's actually focus on one of these areas. So first of all, I'd like to know, what's your decision-making culture? So in your team, in your organization, and if you just work as a solopreneur, you might choose to just say, what's your decision-making culture individually? And I reckon people fall into one of 4 categories when we're talking about decision-making culture. So let me go through them. So first of all, is the culture in an organization or a team or even individual who is just resistant. So they don't want to make a decision. They just go, look, don't tell me about it. I see no evil, hear no evil, and I do no evil. I'll just pretend that the world hasn't changed around me. And if somebody else makes a decision that's going to change me, fine, I'll go along with it, but don't ask me to make a decision. And I know that you probably come across people like that who are resistant and don't want to make a decision. And sometimes decisions are made for them and they go along with it. Sometimes decisions are made for them and they just push back against them. Okay, I hope you're not like that. I don't think you are individually, but maybe your team or your organization has that kind of culture. The second kind, you may relate to this, that you see this old sign, drink coffee, do stupid things faster with more energy. So these are the people who just jump at decisions. They're impulsive. They say, go, a good decision is a fast decision, and they just go click, 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 let's just make a decision and move forward. The problem with that is sometimes they don't make well-informed decisions. So it's true that deciding fast is a good idea, and not making a decision is still making a decision. It's just deciding to be happy with the status quo. But super fast decisions aren't always the best because you don't necessarily have the right information to be able to make that decision. It's like stepping out into the road without looking both ways to look out for traffic. Okay, so there are impulsive people like that, and there's some people who are always impulsive and they always say, let's just make a decision now. And that's not always right. Sometimes the best decision is let's get a bit more information. The opposite problem is the people who want to get every bit of information that they can so that they've got 100% information before they can make a decision. They're just hesitant. It's not that they don't want to make a decision, although there's a little bit of that as well, but that they think there's another bit of information that will help us make a better decision. And you know what? That's always true. But the problem is that you can never get all the information that you need. It's just impossible. So in academia, this is called the PhD syndrome. So people who start out on a PhD do pretty well. They're really motivated when they get started. They get 80 to 90% of the way through it. And then they don't complete their PhD because there's always one more lit review to do. There's always one more study that they can do. There's always one more bit of research that can add to their PhD. So they never get it complete. So they're hesitant in making decisions because they don't have enough information. Problem is there's never enough information. And then the fourth group, which is the positive group, are the decisive ones. So they're the ones who say, yep, let's make a decision now once we've got this information. So they say, let's get enough information so we can make a smart decision, and then let's go ahead and make a decision. So let's do a quick poll here. What's your decision-making culture? And as I said, this could be individually or if you just work by yourself, or it could be for your organization or your team. So I've given you those four options. Let me launch the poll here and we'll see what people say. Okay, so of those four options, and this is broadly because, people do change at various times, but I reckon you probably have an idea of what you're like or what your organization's like, and I don't mind which way you go along with it. Let's see what people say. Great. Okay. Almost everybody has voted. So let me show you the results, which is pretty typical and not surprising with this group here. And because it's a bit self-selecting, you're coming here because you want to know how to be better and how to be more fit for the future. So it's not surprising that most people do say that we're pretty decisive. Okay. And that's not surprising, but with many organizations, that's just not the case. There are organizations where the culture, and especially the leadership culture, is, no, we're really impulsive. We just jump at everything and we make instant decisions without getting enough information. Or it can be it's like trying to walk through treacle to get a decision made because everyone wants their input, everyone wants more information, and we're quite hesitant and we don't make decisions, and therefore we miss opportunities. Okay, so if you're looking at these four categories, and I've grouped them this way so that you can see how they fit. So it's finding the right balance between making a fast decision, but also having the right information to make the decision. And information is there's two parts to that. One is actual information, actual data and evidence. And the second kind is the information about how to make good decisions. So it's actually having smart decision-making processes. So we want to make faster decisions. We don't want to be these resistant or hesitant people, but equally we want to have we want to have better information so we can make better decisions. So let's talk about some of the stuff that might be coming up in the future that can help you make a better decision. And I'm not going to try to give you a whole bunch of futuristic stuff. I want to give you some guidelines so that you can go away and take some of these ideas and put them into practice. So I want to give you some tools that futurists use to improve decision making. And this is sort of stuff that I do when I work, especially when I work deeply with senior leadership teams with their strategic planning. These are sort of tools that I work with them and I facilitate them through. So here's one. This first one is the Gartner hype cycle. So if you're not already following what Gartner is doing, then I think you should. Every year they publish their hype cycle and they look at various trends, generally technology trends, but not completely. And they classify them on this curve. And this curve has 5 areas. So it's got this technology trigger, the peak of inflated expectations. So expectations are high, but it may be inflated. And then you have this trough of disillusionment, where there's a lot of technologies that have very high, that are hyped up at the start. People have very high expectations of them, but with a little bit of time, they fall into this trough of disillusionment. Then you have if they either fall off the cliff completely, but sometimes they do have a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. So they get onto this enlightenment slope. And then it's only when they get to this plateau of productivity do we say, yes, we've got mainstream acceptance of this technology. Okay, so let me give you a couple of examples from the Gartner hype cycle. So one of them is blockchain. So Bitcoin was the thing that made blockchain really sexy and popular. Blockchain is the technology underlying Bitcoin. So Gartner says, and I totally agree with this, and I was predicting this a year ago, that blockchain has passed this peak of inflated expectations and is a little bit of this trough of disillusionment now. So if you've been following the business media, you know there's a lot less talk now around Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. There is in certain circles, but in mainstream media, there's a lot less around that. And even around blockchain, there's lots of people talking about the potential of blockchain. But when the only language you see is potential and not actual examples, then you should be skeptical about it. Not to say that there isn't any potential behind it, but you should be skeptical. And that's why Gartner at the moment says that blockchain is falling into this trough of disillusionment rather than it's going to move towards this plateau of productivity. So yeah, I've kind of been skeptical about blockchain. I'm going, give me some evidence, show me the evidence around that. Okay, so that's an example of a technology, a trend that was probably 6 months to a year ago, probably a year ago, was right up here. Inflated expectations, lots of expectations early, and now inflated expectations, inflated and now falling down into this trough. So what does Gartner think is moving upwards? Well, the big thing that's on Gartner's radar here is artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is moving into this area, and Gartner says that in the next 5 to 10 years, AI is just going to continue growing. And it's going to continue growing because we're already using it. It's already in your smart devices, it's in your car, it's in home appliances even in some cases, and it's just going to keep growing. So that's so if you're looking at what should you be aware of, then artificial intelligence would be high on the list. But the point I want to make today is that look at the Gartner hype cycle and have a look at some of the things that Gartner, there's a lot of analysis in this area, says will be something to consider for the future. Okay, I just want to stop and just take any questions about this, questions or comments about the Gartner hype cycle, because it's a really useful tool that you should be looking at for your business and for your industry. Not everything that Gartner says is valid for 100% of industries, but it's a useful starting point. And I'm going to share another one soon. So does anyone want me to clarify or explain anything or ask me questions about it? I don't see any questions here, so let me continue because I want to share the 3 tools here. This is the first one. Here's the second one. The second one is a tool called scenario planning, and I'll explain it and I'll use it as an example. So the Future Today Institute, they've published their own tech trends report, and where they look at for 2018 and forward, what are some of the big important trends that we need to be aware of. And what they have done is they have grouped them into one of 4 categories. And the 4 categories are based around this idea of scenario planning. And scenario planning is a process that was developed by Shell in the 1970s, and they look at multiple scenarios. And let me show you a model around that that can be really useful. So you look at any trend, and similar to what Gartner does, it says, look, is it likely or not? So is there a high certainty that it's going to happen, or is it still low certainty? In other words, there's a whole bunch of hype around it, but we're not yet sure whether it's going to be adopted, especially adopted mainstream. So there's a scale there. The other axis that you look at, the other scale that you look at is this going to have an impact on us now, or is it going to have more of a long-term impact? So even if it's high certainty, some things may be high certainty and long-term impact. So when you look at it that way, there are 4 possibilities when you look at any technology, any trend, and you can do some analysis around anything. Artificial intelligence, blockchain, robotics, whatever you like. And the Future Today Institute has done this analysis for a whole bunch of trends. So you can download this report. It's free from the Future Today Institute website. And for each of the trends that they've identified, they've grouped them into one of these 4 areas. So let me tell you what those 4 are, because it'll help you when you read the report, and it'll help you when you do your own analysis as well. Okay, so the first one, which is the weakest one, is where you've got things which are pretty uncertain at the moment, and if they're going to have an impact, it'll be a long-term impact. So, for example, sending populations or colonizing Mars. So the chance of it happening, there's still a lot of hurdles to be overcome, and it's probably not going to happen for half a generation to a generation. So it's okay to say, let's forget about that for the moment. We've got other more important things that we should be looking at, and you can revisit that later. Okay, what about if it's a long-term impact, but a high certainty? So what's something that we know is going to happen, but it may not happen immediately? So I think autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars, fall into this category. So they're definitely going to happen. They're already around, and car manufacturers are already creating self-driving cars that can drive better than humans can. But there are some social issues to overcome, as well as infrastructure issues to overcome before they become mainstream. So yes, they should inform your strategy. You should know about them, but you don't necessarily have to think about them in the next 12 to 18 months. What about here? This is kind of the opposite of that. So this is something that could have an immediate impact, but it's low certainty. So I think blockchain falls into this category. So if blockchain, and if you see really good examples of blockchain and it takes over an industry, it's going to have an immediate impact. But as I said, at the moment, I think there's a lot of hype around it. So we shouldn't necessarily assume it's going to happen fast, but we should have our radar tuned to it so we stay vigilant. And then the 4th category are the ones that we should act on now, which we know are going to happen and they're going to have an immediate impact. Okay, so there's some technology like that. Artificial intelligence is the obvious one that I've already mentioned. Social, mobile, all of those things are having an immediate impact. So we should act on them now. So I'm not going to go through what some of those things might be, because what I want to do here is just explain the model to you so that you can think about what's it going to mean for your business. And also, when you download this Tech Trends report, the Future Today Institute has classified each one of their trends into one of these 4 categories based on their assessment of what impact that's going to have on the world. It's not 100% accurate, because your industry, your business may be different, but it is a useful starting point. So I want to share that with you so that when you download that report, you can evaluate it, that you can understand it. And also, when you see any new technology or any new trend, you can decide how does that fit into your world. Okay, I'm just going to stop to see if there are any questions around that. Okay, so the question is, what's the difference between stay vigilant and revisit later? So yeah, so in both cases, like revisit later doesn't mean that you ignore it permanently, but that you do keep an eye on it. You don't have to worry about it now. Where stay vigilant is, yep, I need to be aware of it, because if it happens, then it's going to happen fast. Okay, so that's one of the differences. So stay vigilant means that it could have an immediate impact if it happens. It's just that it's at the moment it's not likely, but you never know. It might happen. Somebody might come up with some amazing, crazy idea, which turns something that looks like low certainty into reality. Okay, Philippe says, where do you think 3D printing is? Okay, so 3D printing is one of the things that the Future Today Institute identified as in the top right corner. So it's high certainty because it's already happening. It's already happening in a number of industries. And if it happens in yours, it'll have an immediate impact. So yes, so they say, yep, you should act now on 3D printing, or at least the effect of 3D printing on your business or your industry. Okay, so that's just one I knew off the top of my head. I don't know them all. There are a whole bunch in that report, and it's worth downloading that report and going through this analysis. Okay, one last tool that's really useful for you is based on the idea of if you look at something that's happening in your business, in your industry at the moment. So I often talk about the fact that the world is moving towards fast, flat, and free. So our world is becoming faster. We're breaking down barriers so that our world's becoming flatter, and costs are coming down and people are expecting more for less. So our world's becoming freer. So if that's good, the opposite of that is slow, bumpy, and expensive. And if you've got anything in your business or even in your industry that's slow, bumpy, or expensive, that's potentially a warning sign. So I'll just do this very quickly so that you can have this slide to give you some ideas of things to think about. So if you've got something that's slow to deliver, so it takes a while for people to get the results. It's a service. Services are easy to be outsourced and later automated. If it's technical or complex, then it may be slow at the moment, and there may be faster versions of it just around the corner. Is it bumpy? So do you work in an industry that's regulated, licensed, controlled? Is this stuff that's mandated for customers and for you as a provider? If so, it's bumpy and it's not flat. Or is it at the moment expensive? So do you charge upfront fees rather than say a low monthly membership or low monthly subscription? Is it boring for customers while they're working with you? Does it take a while for them to get results? So anything that falls into one of those three categories, which is slow, bumpy, or expensive, could be potentially a disruptor. So somebody could come along and create a faster, flatter, freer version of this. So just one example, and I use this one because everyone knows about it, is the taxi industry. Slow, bumpy, and expensive. So highly regulated, highly controlled, and government controlled. So it meant that it was very difficult for new entrants to come in there. But then along comes Uber, which was illegal and sometimes is illegal still in some jurisdictions, but it provided a faster, flatter, and cheaper alternative to what the taxi industry provided. As a result, the taxi industry has been forced to, it's lost some of its control because Uber has forced governments to change the rules because governments, of course, are supposed to serve the people. So that's just an example of something that was slow, bumpy, and expensive, really carefully protected, but because somebody came along and offered something that was faster, flatter, and in this case cheaper, it actually has made a significant impact on that industry. Okay, so I reckon I'll be sending you the recording of this and you may be watching the recording of this, but if you're not, this is a good opportunity to take a snapshot of this screen because of this slide on this screen, because these are sort of things that might signify danger for you. Okay, so those are three things I want to talk about. And as I said, if you complete the exit survey today, then I'll send you the report about the Think Sharper report. One last story to end with which I often use with many of my presentations. You may have seen this one before. This is a 2,000-year-old Greek paradox. And if I ask you the question, is that a heap of sand? Assuming that there's sand there, you'd say yes. And if I said, if I take away a grain of sand, is it still a heap of sand? You say yes. What if I took another grain, another grain, another grain? I could take away thousands of grains of sand, and you'd say, yeah, that's still a heap of sand, right? But at some point, you get to the point where there's just a few scattered grains of sand on the ground, and you say, no, that's not a heap of sand anymore. So my question is, when did it stop being a heap of sand? And the answer is there's no real answer. There's no point at which you can say it stopped. But definitely, at one point it was, and at some point in the future, when there's a few scattered grains, it wasn't. And this is what happens with disruption and change and innovation, and what happens with industries. Nothing, it's very rare that you see an industry that's disrupted overnight. It almost never happens that way. That you might just lose a customer or client to a competitor. So one grain of sand goes, or somebody decides to use an app instead of dealing directly with you. So you lose another grain of sand. Or somebody decides that they can get some information on Google instead of hiring you. So you lose another grain of sand. And this is what happens. And eventually one day you might wake up and you find you've got you don't have a heap of sand anymore. But if you're vigilant, then that wouldn't have happened. So look after those grains of sand and look out for the disruptive forces that could have an effect on them. And I showed this once recently, and somebody said, like, how do you make sure you preserve that grain of sand? And they said, pour a bunch of concrete over it. And in fact, that's funny, but that's actually what people used to do. And it used to work, that you could protect your heap of sand by protecting it with something like concrete and making sure that nobody else could attack it. It's just not the case anymore in our fast, flat, and free world. And especially established businesses have that challenge now, where previously being established meant that you could build those barriers around you. You could rely on your distribution network or government regulation or the fact that you got in early. It's just not the case anymore. In our fast, flat, and free world, there are forces that are attacking our heap of sand. So when you take action, don't wait for everything to be lined up, for everything to be perfect. Start before you're ready. Take action now, because the world isn't going to wait for you. Thanks everyone for coming along. If you'd like to know more, if you'd like to work with me, then have a look at gihanpereira.com, where you can find out about my speaking, my strategic planning services that I'm doing, work that I'm doing with senior leaders. More and more I'm doing that because more and more people want to know how to become fit for the future. If you've got any feedback, drop me an email at gihanpereira.com. Thanks very much and have a great day. Bye for now.